The late autumn winds swept across the endless plains of Silver Creek, Nebraska, bending the tall, brittle grass and rattling the windows of the Silver Creek Academy's grand, ivy-covered buildings. Against the backdrop of a crimson sky, the old bell atop the administration building told the start of another lunch period. Students streamed from classrooms, some in polished loafers, others in sneakers that had seen better days, but the distinction between them was unmistakable. At the far end of the cafeteria, near the less glamorous side of the room, where sunlight barely reached, Jacob Reed stood quietly in line. His faded jeans and neatly ironed shirt set him apart from the other students who wore designer brands and boasted about ski trips and beach houses. Jacob, 16 years old and the son of a humble farmer, knew better than to expect an easy welcome here. Even with his scholarship, the only one given to a local farm kid this year, he carried an invisible label: outsider. Jacob balanced his tray carefully, scanning the room for a place to sit. As usual, the tables were packed, not just with students, but with the unspoken hierarchies of wealth and lineage that ran deeper than the academy's prestigious facade let on. He spotted an open seat near Max Daniels, a quiet freshman who often kept to himself. Just as Jacob moved toward it, a sudden commotion erupted near the center of the room. "Move, squirt!" barked a voice dripping with arrogance. Jacob froze, his gray eyes narrowing. Chase Whitman, the mayor's son, tall, broad-shouldered, and used to getting his way, had cornered Max against the table, shoving the smaller boy's tray to the floor. Food splattered across the polished tiles as laughter rippled through the room. Jacob's jaw tightened. His father, Samuel Reed, had raised him with one unbreakable rule: stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. And right now, every fiber of Jacob's being told him this was one of those moments. He set his tray down carefully and stepped forward. "Hey!" Jacob's voice rang out, cutting through the buzz of conversation. "Back off, Chase." A few heads turned. Silence fell over the nearby tables as curiosity spread like wildfire. Chase turned slowly, flashing a mocking grin. Oh, look, the charity case found his voice. Jacob stood his ground. Leave him alone. Chase's smile twisted into something meaner. Or what? You gonna throw a pitchfork at me, farm boy? Snickers broke out across the cafeteria. Jacob's fists clenched at his sides, but he remembered his father's other rule: never throw the first punch. Calmly, he moved between Chase and Max, shielding the younger boy with his body. Chase shoved Jacob hard in the shoulder. "Know your place." Jacob stumbled but didn't fall. Straightening, he stared Chase down. "This is my place, just like it's yours." Before Chase could respond, Mr. Connor, the assistant principal, hurried over, pushing his way through the gathering crowd. "What's going on here?" he demanded, eyeing the mess on the floor. Chase immediately straightened, adopting a look of innocence. "Just a misunderstanding, sir." Max slipped. Jacob opened his mouth to speak, but Chase cut him off. Jacob here got a little defensive. Mr. Connor looked between the two boys, his gaze lingering longer on Jacob, noting the simple clothes, the farm boy's stoicism, the kind of student Silver Creek Academy had only recently, and reluctantly, begun admitting. "Principal Carver will want to hear about this," Mr. Connor said grimly. "Jacob Reed, come with me." "But," Max started, his voice trembling. Jacob shot him a look that said, "It's okay." He wouldn't let Max get dragged into this. Head high, Jacob followed Mr. Connor out of the cafeteria, feeling the eyes of the entire student body burning into his back. Principal Vivian Carver's office was as pristine and unwelcoming as the woman herself. Dark wood paneling lined the walls, and a large portrait of the school's founder, a stern-faced man in 19th century garb, hung over her imposing desk. Carver sat behind it now, hands folded neatly, a thin smile playing on her lips that didn't reach her sharp blue eyes. "Jacob Reed," she said, as if tasting something unpleasant. "Take a seat." Jacob obeyed, feeling the heavy silence settle between them. "I understand there was an altercation in the cafeteria," Carver began, her tone clipped. "Physical confrontations are not tolerated at Silver Creek Academy. Our reputation rests on the decorum and excellence of our student body." Jacob swallowed. I didn't start anything, ma'am. I was trying to stop Chase from bullying Max Daniels. Carver's expression hardened. Regardless of intent, physical engagement is grounds for disciplinary action. But Chase shoved me, Jacob protested, struggling to keep his voice even. You could have sought out a staff member instead of escalating the situation, she replied coolly. Your behavior was inappropriate for a student at this institution. Jacob's heart hammered in his chest. He knew how this worked. Chase, the mayor's son, would get a slap on the wrist. If that. He, the farmer's kid, would take the fall. I'm suspending you for 2 weeks, Principal Carver said, her voice final. Effective immediately. Jacob's breath caught, but she cut him off with a raised hand. You may appeal the decision after serving your suspension. Perhaps in that time, you'll reflect on whether Silver Creek Academy is the right environment for you. Jacob stood slowly, his fists trembling at his sides. With all due respect, ma'am, this isn't about reflecting. It's about who you think belongs here. Principal Carver's lips thinned into a line. Good day, Mr. Reed. Outside her office, Samuel Reed was waiting, his weathered face unreadable. He had changed out of his work clothes for the meeting, wearing his best flannel shirt and clean jeans, but he still carried the smell of soil and sunlight, a stark contrast to the polished corridors of the academy. When Jacob approached, Samuel placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder. Let's go, son, he said quietly. They walked down the hall together, Jacob fighting back the bitter taste of injustice in his mouth. As they stepped into the brisk afternoon air, Jacob turned to his father. It doesn't matter what we say. People like Carver only see what they want to see. Samuel nodded, his gaze sweeping over the proud brick buildings of Silver Creek Academy. Maybe so, he said, but that doesn't mean we let them write our story. Jacob looked up at his father, taking strength from the steady resolve in his eyes. No, sir, Jacob said, his voice steady. We don't. As they climbed into the battered pickup truck and pulled away from the academy, neither father nor son noticed Olivia Barnes standing by the wrought iron fence, watching them with narrowed eyes. Her hands clenched at her sides, a silent promise forming in her heart. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. The early morning light crept into the kitchen of the Reed farmhouse, spilling across the worn oak table where Samuel Reed sat, staring down at a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Jacob, sitting across from him, fidgeted with the sleeve of his flannel shirt, the silence between them almost unbearable. You ready, son? Samuel asked at last, his voice steady but weighted. Jacob nodded, swallowing the tight lump in his throat. Yeah, Dad, as ready as I'll ever be. The drive to Silver Creek Academy was a quiet one. Their old Ford pickup rumbled down the 2-lane road, past fields tinged with the last golden hues of autumn. Samuel kept one hand firmly on the wheel, his jaw clenched, his knuckles white. When they pulled into the school's circular driveway, Samuel parked among the line of gleaming SUVs and luxury sedans. It was a silent reminder of where they stood among the elite. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive cleaning agents. They were led down a long hallway by the school's receptionist, who kept her gaze averted. At the end of the hall, Principal Vivian Carver stood waiting outside her office, a picture of polished professionalism in a navy blue pantsuit, her salt and pepper hair pulled back in a severe bun. Mr. Reed, Jacob, she said curtly. Please, come in. They entered the office, and Samuel took in the surroundings, a mahogany desk, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves crammed with awards, and photographs of Carver shaking hands with various dignitaries. As they sat, Principal Carver wasted no time. Mr. Reed, she began, Silver Creek Academy prides itself on maintaining the highest standards of decorum and conduct. What transpired yesterday during lunch period is unacceptable. Samuel leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. Principal Carver, my son did what he thought was right. He stepped in to stop bullying when no adult was present. Carver gave a tight, humorless smile. There are appropriate channels for handling such matters. Resorting to physical intervention undermines the structure we work hard to maintain. Jacob opened his mouth to speak, but a glance from Samuel kept him quiet, for now. Carver tapped a manicured finger on the file before her. Given the severity of the disruption, and after reviewing witness statements, it is my decision that Jacob will be suspended for 2 weeks. Samuel inhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders tightening. You're punishing him for protecting another student. I'm maintaining order, Carver said crisply. Then with a slight lift of her chin, she added, Furthermore, Mr. Reed, you must understand that families like the Whitmans have a long-standing tradition here at Silver Creek Academy. Their contributions to the school community are significant. There it was, the quiet confession that truth and justice bowed to money and influence. Jacob felt the words land in his gut like a fist. The unfairness of it all was laid bare, not even hidden beneath pleasantries. So Chase Whitman shoves a kid against the wall, and somehow that's less serious because his dad's the mayor? Jacob said, his voice low but burning with anger. Carver's eyes flashed, and she leaned forward. Mr. Reed, watch your tone. Samuel placed a steadying hand on Jacob's arm. With all due respect, Principal Carver, he said, his voice cool, this doesn't feel much like justice. Carver closed the file with a definitive snap. My decision is final. Suspension begins immediately. Jacob stood, fists clenched at his sides. Samuel rose more slowly, his broad frame towering over the desk. We'll abide by your decision, Samuel said, but don't think for a second that this is the end of it. Without another word, father and son turned and walked out of the office, the heavy door swinging shut behind them with a hollow thud. By lunchtime, word of Jacob's suspension had spread like wildfire through the corridors of Silver Creek Academy. Olivia Barnes sat at a cafeteria table with a group of students, her brown eyes wide with disbelief. I can't believe it, she said, pushing her tray away. They're punishing Jacob for standing up to a bully? A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. Chase gets away with everything, muttered Tyler Green, another student who had witnessed the incident. Everyone knows it. His dad's the mayor. He thinks he's untouchable. Olivia bit her lip, then pulled out her phone. We have to do something. Like what? Someone asked. Like make some noise, Olivia said, her voice gathering strength. If we stay quiet, they'll think they can keep doing this. She began typing furiously, crafting a post on the school's private student forum. Jacob Reed stood up against bullying and got suspended for it. If you believe Silver Creek Academy should stand for justice, sign the petition. We demand fairness. She hit post and watched as the notifications began to pile up almost immediately. Across the cafeteria, Chase Whitman lounged with his usual entourage, a smug smile playing on his lips. He slapped a buddy on the back. Told you, he bragged. My old man took care of it. He glanced across the room at Olivia and her group, his smile slipping slightly as he noticed the flurry of activity. What's that about? He asked. Looks like they're mad about Jacob, his friend said. Let 'em be mad, Chase said, shrugging. Doesn't matter. Nothing they do can touch me. But for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. At home that evening, Jacob sat at the kitchen table, staring at his suspension notice. Samuel leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Olivia texted, Jacob said finally. They're starting a petition. Samuel nodded. Good. You think it'll make a difference? Samuel met his son's gaze. I don't know, but sometimes, Jacob, the fight isn't just about winning. It's about standing up for what's right. Jacob nodded slowly, feeling the sting of injustice, but also the faint stirring of something stronger. Hope. And somewhere, deep inside the polished walls of Silver Creek Academy, the ground was beginning to shift. The cold Nebraska wind rattled the old barn door as Samuel Reed sat at the kitchen table, his weathered hands clutching his phone tighter than usual. Jacob sat across from him, head down, listlessly picking at the untouched sandwich on his plate. The house, usually filled with the lively clatter of daily farm life, felt unnervingly still. Samuel took a slow breath. Then, with a few deliberate taps, he opened his contacts and scrolled to a name he hadn't called in years, Major Allison Grant. The last time Samuel and Allison had spoken face-to-face was during Samuel's final deployment overseas. Back then, both had worn their uniforms with a mix of pride and burden. Life had pulled them down different paths, Samuel back to the farm, Allison deeper into the service, but the bond of shared duty never frayed. Without hesitation, Samuel typed, "Allison, need your help. Jacob suspended unfairly. Obvious bias. We'll explain more. Call me." Samuel exhaled slowly, the weight of the day sitting heavy on his broad shoulders. Then he pressed send. Outside, the wind rattled the last dry leaves on the trees. A storm was coming, but not the kind you could track on a weather radar. Within minutes, his phone buzzed. Major Allison Grant's name lit up the cracked screen. Samuel answered on the first ring. "Sam," her familiar voice crackled across the line, firm but concerned. "Tell me everything." And so he did. Samuel detailed the incident in the cafeteria, how Jacob had stepped in to defend a younger student from Chase Whitman's bullying, how Principal Carver had twisted the narrative, and how the suspension had been handed down without any serious investigation. As Samuel spoke, Allison listened carefully, her military instincts kicking in. She asked precise questions, probing for details that might have seemed irrelevant to a civilian, but were crucial to her trained mind. When Samuel finished, there was a short silence on the other end. "This is bigger than just your boy, Sam," Allison said finally. "This sounds like a systemic problem. Discrimination against military families and rural students, that's something the department's already got its eyes on." Samuel nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I hate dragging Jacob into the middle of all this. He just wanted to get an education." "And he still will," Allison assured him. "But we're not letting this slide. Leave it with me." By the time Samuel ended the call, night had fully fallen. The lights from the farmhouse flickered against the dark, a lone beacon in the rolling Nebraska landscape. Samuel set his phone down carefully and looked across the table at Jacob, who had just entered the kitchen. "Was that Major Grant?" Jacob asked, sliding into a chair opposite his father. "It was," Samuel said, his voice steady. "She's moving it up the chain." Jacob looked down at his hands, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. "I didn't mean to cause so much trouble." Samuel leaned forward, his eyes fierce but kind. "You didn't cause anything, son. You did the right thing. It's the system that's wrong, not you." Jacob nodded, though he didn't look entirely convinced. He still carried the heavy burden of being 15 and feeling like the whole world had suddenly shifted under his feet. Across town at Silver Creek Academy, Jacob's name was quickly becoming a whisper on every student's lips. Word of the suspension and the surrounding circumstances had spread faster than a prairie wildfire. In the cafeteria, Olivia Barnes sat huddled with a group of friends, a collection of scholarship students, military kids, and a few others tired of the unspoken caste system that governed their school. "We can't just let this happen," Olivia said, her voice low but fierce. "Jacob was suspended for doing the right thing. If we stay quiet, they'll think it's okay to keep doing this." Her best friend, Eric Sanchez, a wiry boy with sharp eyes and a sharper mind, nodded. "Agreed, but what can we do? It's Principal Carver. She's untouchable." "Maybe," Olivia said, pulling out a spiral notebook, "but if we all speak together, we're harder to ignore." She began sketching out a petition, demand for fair treatment. "We, the undersigned students of Silver Creek Academy, call upon the administration to reassess Jacob Reed's suspension with transparency and fairness, implement unbiased disciplinary practices, ensuring no student is favored because of family status, protect the rights of all students, regardless of their socioeconomic background." Eric leaned over her shoulder, eyebrows rising. "You sure you want to push this hard?" Olivia met his gaze steadily. "Jacob stood up for a kid being bullied. Now it's our turn to stand up for him." By lunchtime, the petition had begun circulating through text messages and whispered conversations. Students who had never spoken to Jacob personally found themselves nodding along, recalling moments when the Whitmans or their circle had gotten away with things others couldn't. Meanwhile, the teacher's lounge hummed with quieter, more careful discussions. Mrs. Janice Monroe, a veteran history teacher known for her love of dusty books and fiery debates, sat with a coffee cup cradled in her hands, her brow furrowed. "You heard about Jacob Reed?" asked Mr. Ellis, the English teacher, leaning in conspiratorially. Monroe nodded. "Suspended for intervening in a fight he didn't start." Ellis shook his head. "I wasn't there, but from what the kids are saying, it stinks." "It does," Monroe agreed. And it's not the first time Chase Whitman's name has floated around incidents like this either. Across the room, another teacher, Mrs. Patel, glanced over and lowered her voice. Mayor Whitman's pulling strings again? Monroe didn't answer directly. Instead, she straightened in her chair, her voice steady. We have a duty to our students, all of them, especially the ones who don't have powerful parents standing behind them. She glanced around the room, her eyes sharp. Maybe it's time someone reminded Principal Carver of that. While conversations stirred and alliances quietly formed, Chase Whitman lounged in the back of the school's expansive media room, surrounded by his usual crowd. Dressed in his Letterman jacket, he leaned back in a swivel chair, kicking his sneakers up on a table. You should have seen their faces, Chase drawled with a smirk. Reed and his old man. Pathetic. One of his cronies, Hunter Price, laughed. You really got the principal to side with you? Chase tapped his temple mockingly. It's called influence, boys. My dad had a little chat with Carver. She knows which side her bread's buttered on. There was a general round of chuckles, but not everyone laughed as easily. Jason Miller, another student at the table, shifted uncomfortably. His father might have owned a car dealership instead of City Hall, but he still knew injustice when he saw it. He kept his mouth shut, for now. As Chase basked in his self-congratulation, across the school, Olivia gathered signatures at a brisk pace. Some students hesitated, worried about retaliation, but others, especially scholarship kids and military dependents, signed eagerly, many muttering, "Finally," under their breath. By the end of the school day, the petition had garnered over 100 signatures. Enough, Olivia hoped, to make Principal Carver and the broader community pay attention. Meanwhile, back at the Reed farm, Samuel's phone buzzed with a reply. Sam, got your message. This isn't just about Jacob. It's bigger. Sit tight. Help is coming. Samuel leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. A glimmer of hope pierced through the heavy gray cloud hanging over him. He didn't know exactly what Major Grant was planning, but if she said help was coming, it was coming. The undercurrents were growing stronger, and soon, Silver Creek Academy, and the powerful people who thought they controlled it, would realize they were standing on shifting ground. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away at a military base, Major Allison Grant sat at her desk, typing a classified incident report into the secure Army communication network. She flagged it urgent and routed it straight to Colonel Matthew Hayes, the head of the newly launched Military Family Protection and Education Initiative. She attached a short note. Potential case of discriminatory practices against military-affiliated and rural students. Immediate review recommended. Details attached. Grant. Within 15 minutes, Colonel Hayes responded with 2 words. On it. Across multiple channels, military, Department of Education, state offices, wheels began turning. By midnight, Silver Creek's sleepy normalcy was quietly crumbling under the weight of something much bigger than a schoolyard fight. At Silver Creek Academy, Principal Vivian Carver was up late in her office, sipping herbal tea and reviewing the final draft of the school's fall gala donor list. She felt content, satisfied that she had deftly handled the incident with minimal disruption to the school's image. No scandal, no angry board members. Chase Whitman, after all, was the mayor's son, and preserving relationships with Silver Creek's founding families was crucial for the school's financial health. Her phone rang, an unfamiliar number flashing across the screen. Carver hesitated, annoyance flickering across her carefully Botoxed features. Probably a parent whining, she thought. She answered briskly. Principal Carver speaking. Good evening, Principal, said a crisp voice. This is Deputy Director Marshall from the Nebraska Department of Education. I'm calling in reference to a disciplinary action recently taken at Silver Creek Academy involving a student named Jacob Reed. Carver sat up straighter. Yes, I'm aware of the case. We've received a formal complaint from a federal military liaison, Marshall continued, alleging bias against a student affiliated with a military family and socioeconomic discrimination. Under the Military Family Education Rights Act and State Code 1207, your institution is now under preliminary review. Carver blinked, stunned. That seems premature, she said carefully. This was a minor school discipline matter. It's no longer minor, Marshall replied curtly. Given the federal attention, you are required to submit a full written report of the incident. including all witness statements, administrative notes, and disciplinary procedures followed by noon tomorrow. Failure to comply will result in an escalation to the state board and possible emergency intervention. Carver's mouth went dry. I understand. The line clicked dead without further pleasantries. Principal Carver set the phone down with a trembling hand. She glanced around her luxurious wood-paneled office. The plaques, the awards, the photographs, with smiling donors. All suddenly felt flimsy, insubstantial. One boy, one farm boy, had threatened the empire she had spent her entire career building. She cursed under her breath and opened her laptop, beginning to draft the report. But even as she typed, she knew it wouldn't be enough. Somewhere in her gut, Vivian Carver realized tomorrow would not be like any other day at Silver Creek Academy. Tomorrow, the storm would arrive. The morning sun barely crested over the rolling hills of Silver Creek when the distant rumble began. At first, it was a low, almost imperceptible vibration in the ground, felt more than heard. Birds scattered from the sycamore trees lining the fields, their frantic wings slicing the chilled morning air. On the outskirts of town, farmers paused their early chores, shading their eyes and scanning the sky. At Silver Creek Academy, students were filing into the main building for their first classes, chatting idly about assignments, weekend plans, and the growing buzz surrounding Jacob Reed's suspension. Inside, Principal Vivian Carver adjusted her navy blue blazer in the mirror of her office, practicing the measured, detached tone she would use in the faculty meeting scheduled for later that morning. Then came the unmistakable thump, thump, thump of heavy helicopter blades slicing the sky. Within seconds, the hum escalated into a deafening roar, drawing every eye upward. Students and faculty alike rushed to the windows, faces pressed against the glass, mouths agape. The cafeteria doors swung open as kids poured out onto the lawns. Teachers abandoned their coffee cups and lesson plans, wandering outside in a mixture of curiosity and confusion. Overhead, 3 immense Black Hawk helicopters, their matte gray frames gleaming under the morning sun, descended like modern-day leviathans. Emblazoned with U.S. Army markings, they maneuvered in tight formation, their downdrafts flattening the soccer goals and sending loose papers flying across the field. "Holy smokes," someone gasped. "Are we being invaded?" another student shouted half-jokingly. Carver stormed out of the front doors, shielding her eyes from the swirling dust. Her heart jackhammered in her chest, but she forced herself to maintain an air of composure. She could not, would not, allow the situation to spiral out of her control. The helicopters touched down in perfect synchronization on the school's athletic field. Their side doors slid open, and out stepped a contingent of uniformed officers, their medals flashing like small suns against crisp dress blues. At their head marched Major Allison Grant and Colonel Matthew Hayes, both flanked by officials in dark suits bearing Department of Education insignias. Gasps rippled through the gathering crowd. Students whipped out their phones, recording video clips with trembling hands. Teachers exchanged worried glances. Even the janitorial staff froze mid-step, wide-eyed and disbelieving. Carver swallowed hard. She recognized Major Grant immediately. Samuel Reed had mentioned the name in passing years ago. Now, Grant was here in full regalia, with enough brass and federal backup to make it clear this wasn't a courtesy call. Behind the officials, news vans screeched into the parking lot, satellite dishes springing upward like periscopes. Local journalists spilled out, scrambling to set up tripods and microphones. Jacob Reed, standing among the student body, felt his stomach flip. Olivia nudged him lightly, her expression both awed and uncertain. "Jacob," she whispered, Is this for you?" He shook his head slowly, unable to form words. His heart thundered in his ears louder than the helicopter's had. Colonel Hayes led the procession up the school's main walkway, his boots striking the concrete with crisp, deliberate steps. Major Grant followed close behind, her expression unreadable, though there was a determined set to her jaw. Carver hurried forward, her heels clicking against the sidewalk. She plastered on her most professional smile, the same one she used when wooing influential donors, and extended her hand toward Colonel Hayes. "Welcome to Silver Creek Academy," she said, her voice only slightly wavering. "How may I assist you this morning?" Hayes didn't return the smile. He didn't even glance at her offered hand. Instead, He pulled a crisp, folded document from his breast pocket and handed it to her. "Principal Carver," he said, his voice like a gravel road under a heavy truck. "By order of the Department of Defense in coordination with the Department of Education, we are here to conduct a full review of Silver Creek Academy's disciplinary practices, particularly as they pertain to military families and economically disadvantaged students." The blood drained from Carver's face. This must be some kind of misunderstanding," she stammered. Hayes's steely gaze didn't waver. "There's no misunderstanding, ma'am. The governor's office has also been notified. This is a federal educational equity inquiry." A collective murmur ran through the crowd. Students exchanged wide-eyed looks. Some teachers visibly paled. Carver tried to gather herself, motioning toward the main building. "Perhaps we should discuss this inside." "Indeed," Hayes agreed. He turned to the officials behind him. "Escort the student witnesses and the parents of the involved parties to the auditorium. Secure all relevant staff for questioning." Within minutes, a wave of soldiers and federal agents swept through the school, their presence professional but firm. Students were gently but firmly herded toward the gymnasium-turned-assembly hall. Parents who had been summoned, including Samuel Reed, who stood tall and unbowed, were ushered through side entrances. Inside the auditorium, a temporary podium had been erected. Colonel Hayes approached it, waiting for the room to settle before speaking. "Good morning," he said, his voice commanding the attention of even the most distracted students. "Today, we are here not to disrupt your education, but to ensure that every student, regardless of background, is treated with fairness, dignity, and respect." He let the words hang in the air before continuing. "Silver Creek Academy has been the subject of serious allegations concerning discriminatory practices against students from military families and economically disadvantaged backgrounds. These claims will be thoroughly investigated." Jacob sat frozen in his chair, Olivia beside him. Around them, students whispered furiously. At the side of the room, Major Grant watched with a keen eye, while Mrs. Monroe, standing discreetly near the faculty seating area, offered Jacob an encouraging nod. Colonel Hayes continued. "Today's review will involve interviews, document examinations, and a careful analysis of all disciplinary actions taken in recent months. Transparency will not be optional." Carver, seated near the front, clutched her leather-bound portfolio so tightly her knuckles turned white. From the back of the room, the local news crews captured every moment. It was happening. The reckoning Jacob Reed never imagined could come was unfolding. Not in hushed meetings behind closed doors, but out in the open, under the judgment of cameras, military brass, and a community that was finally being forced to confront the cracks in its own proud facade. And the roar that had shaken the sky that morning was just the beginning. The gymnasium at Silver Creek Academy had never been this full, not even during the state basketball championship. Now, students packed the bleachers, teachers lined the walls, and a tension thick as the humidity before a summer storm crackled through the air. A small podium stood awkwardly in the middle of the polished wooden floor, flanked by folding chairs hastily set up for the school's faculty and the unexpected military guests. Colonel Matthew Hayes, a towering figure in crisp army dress uniform, stood at the podium, surveying the gathered crowd with a steady, composed gaze. His very presence seemed to demand attention and respect. Principal Vivian Carver sat stiffly to one side, her usual imperious demeanor visibly shaken, though she tried to mask it behind a strained smile. A low murmur swept through the crowd as Colonel Hayes tapped the microphone and the speakers gave a slight crackle. "Good morning, students, faculty, and staff of Silver Creek Academy," he began, his voice deep and commanding. "I'm Colonel Matthew Hayes, Director of the Military Family Education Protection Initiative. Today, we are here to address concerns that have been raised regarding the treatment of students from military and agricultural families within this institution." Whispers erupted across the gym. Jacob Reed, standing near the back alongside his father Samuel, and a few supportive teachers like Mrs. Monroe, felt his heart hammer against his ribs. He hadn't expected anything like this. None of them had. Colonel Hayes continued, his tone firm but fair. "An incident involving a student named Jacob Reed has been brought to our attention. It has raised serious questions about fairness, due process, and the values this academy claims to uphold." Out of the corner of his eye, Jacob saw Chase Whitman lounging smugly next to his cronies, arms folded, a cocky smirk on his face. Jacob clenched his fists, but said nothing. "Before we proceed," Hayes said, "I have been informed that there is a petition initiated by the student body regarding this matter. I would like to invite the students responsible to step forward." All eyes turned as Olivia Barnes, standing tall and unafraid, emerged from the throng of students. She carried a thick sheaf of papers, signatures spilling across every page. Behind her marched nearly 24 students, representing every grade level, each wearing a handmade pin shaped like a small silver feather, a quiet symbol of solidarity. Olivia approached the podium with a calmness that belied her pounding heart. She handed the petition to Colonel Hayes, who accepted it with a nod of approval. "Over 400 signatures," Olivia said, her voice steady. "Students who believe in fairness, students who believe that Jacob Reed deserves better." A ripple of applause broke out, hesitant at first, then growing louder. Mrs. Monroe smiled proudly from her spot near the faculty. Colonel Hayes held up the petition for everyone to see. "This," he said, "is what leadership looks like." He turned slightly toward the faculty seats. "Principal Carver, in light of the overwhelming student response and the concerns raised by multiple witnesses, it is only fair that Mr. Jacob Reed be given a voice today." Jacob froze, every instinct screaming at him to sink into the floor and disappear. Samuel laid a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder, giving it a firm squeeze. "Go," he murmured. "Speak the truth." Swallowing hard, Jacob moved forward. His boots echoed sharply against the polished gym floor. As he reached the podium, he caught sight of Olivia giving him a small nod of encouragement. The microphone seemed impossibly tall, but Colonel Hayes adjusted it down for him with a supportive pat on the back. Jacob gripped the edges of the podium, his palms slick with sweat. He took a deep breath, looked out over the sea of faces, and began. "My name is Jacob Reed," he said, his voice a little shaky at first, but gaining strength with every word. "I come from a farm outside of town. My family grows corn and wheat. We've lived and worked here for generations." He paused, scanning the crowd. "Last week, I saw someone being bullied in our cafeteria. A younger student, cornered and scared. I stepped in. I didn't throw a punch. I didn't start a fight. I just stopped it." He shifted slightly, the weight of the moment heavy on his shoulders. "For that," he continued, "I was suspended." A stunned silence fell over the gym. Even those who had heard the story in whispers now felt the full injustice laid bare before them. Meanwhile, the person who started the bullying... Jacob turned his gaze toward Chase Whitman, walked away with barely a warning. Chase's smug expression faltered, and he shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not here to tear anyone down," Jacob said, his voice steady. "But if we let people be treated differently because of who their parents are, or how much land they own, or how much money they have, then what are we really teaching here?" A few scattered claps broke out. Mrs. Monroe wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. Jacob squared his shoulders. "Respect isn't bought, it's earned, and it starts with standing up for what's right, even when it's hard." The gymnasium erupted in thunderous applause. Even some teachers who had remained silent before now stood, clapping with renewed energy. Colonel Hayes returned to the podium, his expression one of deep admiration. "Thank you, Jacob," he said simply. But just as the applause began to die down, a sharp, sarcastic laugh pierced the air. Chase Whitman stood up, his arms outstretched in mockery. "Oh, please," he sneered. "You all gonna crown Farmer Boy as your new hero now? This place has gone soft." The room went still. Principal Carver half rose from her seat, her mouth opening to intervene, but it was too late. Chase strode onto the gym floor, all false bravado and barely contained rage. "You think because you got a few signatures and a sob story, you're better than me." He lunged forward, shoving Jacob hard in the chest. Gasps erupted from the students. Several teachers shouted, but Jacob, firmly rooted, barely stumbled. He stood his ground, his chin high, his hands balled into fists at his sides, but not raised. Colonel Hayes stepped forward instantly, separating the two with an authoritative gesture. Two military officers, standing near the sidelines, moved swiftly to flank him. Flashbulbs from local journalists' cameras burst across the gym. Several reporters had snuck into the assembly after hearing about the helicopter landing, and now they eagerly captured the moment. Chase, realizing too late the magnitude of what he'd just done in front of hundreds of witnesses and cameras, tried to backpedal. "He provoked me," Chase blurted out, voice cracking. No one believed him. Colonel Hayes turned to Principal Carver, his voice clipped and full of unspoken reprimand. "I believe, Principal Carver, it's time you and the board reconsider not only the actions taken against Mr. Reed, but also the environment of this academy." Carver's face was ashen. She opened her mouth, but no words came. From the back of the gym, Samuel Reed caught his son's eye and gave a single, proud nod. Today, the truth had finally broken through the carefully constructed walls of privilege and power, and it was only the beginning. By midday, Silver Creek Academy was a cauldron of uneasy energy. News crews gathered at the gates, their satellite trucks parked hastily along the narrow streets. Parents, some furious, some anxious, arrived in clusters, demanding answers. Inside the administrative wing, Principal Vivian Carver sat behind her desk, her face pale but composed, her fingers laced tightly atop a folder containing the preliminary findings of the investigation. Colonel Matthew Hayes, flanked by two Department of Education officials, entered the office with the quiet authority of a man used to commanding attention. Without preamble, he set a thick file onto Carver's desk. "Principal Carver," he began, his voice even but implacable. "Based on the testimony collected from students, faculty, and eyewitnesses, along with the review of your disciplinary records over the past 2 years, we are recommending your immediate administrative leave pending further investigation." Carver swallowed hard, her throat dry. "This is highly irregular." Hayes didn't blink. "What is irregular is the school administrator permitting systemic discrimination against students from military and agricultural backgrounds, then compounding it with selective disciplinary practices." He leaned slightly forward, voice low but firm. "You have 30 minutes to vacate your office. An interim principal will be appointed by the end of the day." The door closed behind him with a soft but final click. Across town at City Hall, Mayor Scott Whitman faced a very different but equally relentless storm. A local news station had obtained footage of Chase bragging about his father's connections, ensuring Jacob's punishment. The clip, paired with footage from the assembly where Chase's aggression had been exposed, had gone viral within hours. Reporters mobbed the steps of City Hall, shouting questions over one another. "Mayor Whitman, did you pressure school officials to favor your son? Is it true Silver Creek Academy's disciplinary policies were manipulated for political gain? Should you resign given the allegations of corruption?" Inside his office, Whitman paced like a caged animal. His communications director, a gaunt man named Eric, looked like he hadn't slept. "We need a statement," Eric said urgently. "Something apologetic, but not admitting guilt." Whitman slammed a fist into the mahogany desk. "I built this town's reputation. One mistake by a stupid kid, and they want to burn me at the stake?" Eric didn't respond. The damage was already done, and the tide of public sentiment was turning fast, and viciously. Meanwhile, at the Reed farm, Samuel Reed cleaned the mud off his boots with slow, deliberate strokes. He'd heard about Carver's suspension on the radio, about the mayor's imploding reputation, about how Silver Creek itself had become the latest national symbol of injustice and reckoning. Samuel wasn't a man who sought confrontation, but there were moments when a person had to look another in the eye and say the truth out loud. He drove the old pickup into town and parked in front of the school. No security guard stopped him. No one had the heart anymore. Vivian Carver stood alone outside the building, a cardboard box of personal belongings balanced against her hip. Her tailored jacket looked too formal against the crumbling facade of her career. She saw Samuel approaching and stiffened instinctively. "Mr. Reed," she said, managing a brittle smile, "I suppose you're here to gloat." Samuel shook his head slowly. "I'm not here for revenge, Principal Carver." She laughed bitterly. "Well, you got what you wanted anyway." Samuel stepped closer, his voice low and even. "What I wanted," he said, "was for my son, and every kid like him, to be treated with respect, to be judged by their actions, not by how much land their daddy owns, or whether their mama wears stars on her uniform." Carver's mouth tightened. You don't understand the pressures. No, ma'am, Samuel interrupted gently but firmly. You don't understand. Power isn't about protecting the privileged. It's about standing for those who can't always stand for themselves, and you forgot that. For a moment, they simply stood there, the cold wind tossing leaves around their feet. Silver Creek deserves better, Samuel said finally, tipping his hat politely before turning back toward his truck. Vivian Carver watched him leave, her heart heavy with the weight of all the choices she could no longer undo. That evening, the town square of Silver Creek was filled with more people than it had seen in years. Students, parents, farmers, veterans, and teachers gathered as a local news anchor recounted the day's events live. Jacob stood with Olivia and a small group of students at the front. His face was solemn but resolute. A candlelight vigil had been organized, not just for Jacob, but for every student who had ever been made to feel small because of who they were or where they came from. Samuel stood a few steps behind, arms crossed, his weathered face unreadable. But when Jacob glanced back at him, Samuel gave a small nod of pride. The price of power, it seemed, was finally being paid, and a new reckoning was just beginning. For the first time in weeks, Silver Creek Academy's morning announcements began not with hollow platitudes, but with something that felt meaningful. "Good morning, students," came the voice of Interim Principal Delgado over the PA system. "Today, the Board of Education has issued a formal apology regarding the recent disciplinary action involving Jacob Reed. The board acknowledges the mishandling of the incident and extends its sincere regret." The announcement echoed through every hallway, every classroom. For Jacob, seated in the front row of his American history class, the words landed with a strange weight. Olivia turned to him, her expression soft but proud. Around them, students exchanged glances, a mix of embarrassment, vindication, and relief. It wasn't just an apology, it was validation. Later that morning, Jacob and his father Samuel were invited into the main conference room of the administration building. Waiting there were members of the school board, Interim Principal Delgado, and a representative from the Department of Education. "Jacob," began Ms. Franklin, a board member with kind eyes and a stern voice, "on behalf of the Silver Creek Academy Board, we offer you our sincere apology. We failed you, not only as a student, but as a young man of integrity." She pushed a leather-bound folder toward him across the table. Inside, Jacob found a certificate of recognition for exemplary moral courage and integrity, signed by each member of the board. Samuel Reed sat beside his son, his posture straight, but his eyes slightly glassy. "Jacob didn't do any of this for recognition," he said quietly. "He did it because it was right." "That's precisely why it matters," Ms. Franklin replied. "We want to ensure that students like Jacob aren't just acknowledged, but empowered. Which is why we're also establishing a new scholarship fund." Whispers filled the room. "The Reed Grace Scholarship," she continued, "named in honor of Jacob Reed and Staff Sergeant Daniel Grace, Olivia's father, will provide annual support for students from agricultural and military families. Silver Creek Academy must reflect the full breadth of American excellence." Jacob looked to Olivia, who had just walked in, escorted by her mother. Her eyes lit up, and her hands instinctively reached for his. After the announcement, the campus buzzed with new energy. Banners were hung near the main quad bearing the scholarship's name. Students gathered in circles discussing the events of the past weeks, with a tone that had shifted from gossip to purpose. In the library that afternoon, Jacob, Olivia, and a small group of students met around a long oak table. Beside them was Mrs. Monroe, the history teacher who had stood quietly in the background during the storm, but had never stopped believing in the power of truth. "So, what do we call it?" asked Aidan, one of the juniors who had helped gather petition signatures. "It has to stand for something," Olivia said. "Something lasting." "How about the Student Justice League?" another girl offered, half-jokingly. Jacob smiled. "What if we go with something simple? Something that says exactly what we're here for?" He picked up a pen and wrote slowly on a blank page, "Student Justice Club." Mrs. Monroe nodded approvingly. "It's not flashy, but it's clear. It tells the story." They began outlining their mission, to give students a voice, to create a safe space for reporting misconduct, to collaborate with faculty and administration in revising school policy. What had begun as an act of defiance was now becoming a movement. By the end of the day, they had elected interim officers, Olivia as president, Jacob as vice president, and drafted their first proposal, mandatory fairness training for all staff and a peer-elected student advisory committee on discipline. As twilight descended on Silver Creek, the once divided campus felt, if only slightly, more unified. The harvest moon rose over the football field, casting a gentle light over the banners, the brick buildings, the aging oaks. And there, on a bench overlooking the quad, Jacob sat beside Olivia. "Think it'll last?" she asked. Jacob stared out over the school that had changed him and had been changed by him. "If we keep standing for what's right, yeah, I think it will." Silver Creek Academy had stumbled, but in the process, it had discovered something far more enduring than prestige, the courage to rebuild trust. The autumn sun filtered gently through the red and gold leaves that clung to the trees surrounding Silver Creek Academy. It was the kind of morning that could almost trick you into thinking everything was normal. But inside the school's historic main hall, the air was thick with anticipation. For the first time in its 122-year history, Silver Creek Academy was holding a school-wide assembly, not to celebrate sports victories or welcome a donor, but to publicly acknowledge a moral reckoning. Students packed into the rows of seats, whispering to one another with the kind of excitement that only came when the walls of power began to tremble. At the center of the stage stood acting headmaster Roberta Hensley, who had stepped in after Principal Carver was placed on leave. Her voice carried a clarity and warmth that immediately silenced the room. "Thank you all for being here," she began. "This moment is more than symbolic. It marks the beginning of change that is long overdue." The crowd stirred as a side door opened and Vivian Carver stepped onto the stage. Gone was her signature crimson blazer. She wore a simple black coat, her posture more subdued than anyone had ever seen. Behind her followed members of the school board and a representative from the state education office. Carver approached the microphone with slow, deliberate steps. She paused, taking a long breath before speaking. "To the students, faculty, and families of Silver Creek Academy," she said, her voice carrying a rare softness. "I stand before you today not as your principal, but as someone who made a grievous error in judgment." The room held its collective breath. In my pursuit of prestige, of reputation, I allowed myself to forget the core responsibility of any educator, to treat each student with fairness and dignity, regardless of who they are or where they come from. She turned slightly, meeting Jacob Reed's eyes directly. Jacob sat in the front row with Olivia and Samuel by his side. "Jacob, your courage shone through when mine failed. For that, I offer my deepest and most sincere apology." Jacob gave a small nod, acknowledging the words without gloating. The room remained still, a silence thick with the weight of long-withheld truths. Carver turned back to the assembly. "Effective immediately, I am resigning as principal of Silver Creek Academy. This institution deserves leadership that reflects the values we claim to uphold." A few gasps echoed in the back. Even those who disliked Carver had never expected to see her publicly step down. But the silence quickly turned into respectful applause, not out of celebration, but recognition that accountability had finally arrived. Once Carver left the stage, Chairwoman Eliza Granger from the board took her place at the podium. "This has been a painful but necessary journey for our school. In response to recent events, we are overhauling our disciplinary procedures and scholarship review systems to eliminate bias and increase transparency." She continued, outlining specific reforms: anonymous case reviews, mandatory faculty bias training, student representation in disciplinary committees, and protections for scholarship and military family students. Then, the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. "And now," Eliza said, stepping aside, "a young man whose integrity and courage have inspired us all, Chase Whitman." Whispers surged like a wave across the auditorium. Chase stepped forward slowly, his usual swagger replaced by something less certain. His hands were visibly shaking as he took the microphone. For the first time since the incident, he looked his age, 17, vulnerable, and exposed. "I'm here today because I made a series of decisions I'm ashamed of," he began. "I used my status to intimidate others, and when I was called out, I let my father's position protect me. That wasn't just unfair, it was cowardly." His voice cracked slightly. Jacob Reed stood up when I was doing wrong. He protected someone who couldn't protect themselves, and I mocked him for it. Chase turned toward Jacob, who looked up with quiet composure. I'm sorry, Jacob, to you, to everyone who saw what happened and stayed silent. You deserved better. There was no applause, no cheers, just silence, not uncomfortable, but heavy with reflection. The assembly ended quietly, with students filing out slower than usual. Many of them passed by Jacob, giving him nods, quiet thank yous, and even handshakes. For once, Silver Creek Academy didn't feel like a castle guarded by privilege. It felt like a school starting to remember what it was supposed to be. Outside, on the edge of the lawn, beneath the big sycamore tree, Jacob stood with Olivia, watching the crowd disperse. How do you feel? She asked. Jacob thought for a moment. Like something shifted, he said. Not just for me, for all of us. Back inside the building, Acting Headmaster Hensley watched from her office window. She smiled, then turned to a folder marked Student Initiatives. On the top page, Student Justice League Proposal, founded by Jacob Reed and Olivia Barnes. The gears of change were turning, slowly, but for the first time in a long while, they were turning in the right direction. 1 year later, Silver Creek shimmered under a brilliant summer sun, the fields stretching out in golden, rippling waves as far as the eye could see. It was the kind of day that felt almost too perfect to be real, as if the town itself was holding its breath in pride and gratitude. Today was the day they honored a boy who had stood tall when the world seemed determined to push him down. Today was the day they honored Jacob Reed. The town square was unrecognizable from the sleepy, quiet place it usually was. Bright banners hung from every lamppost, each one bearing the words, Silver Creek Honors Courage and Character. Folding chairs were set up in neat rows, facing a raised wooden stage, and the entire town had come out. Families with kids perched on shoulders, veterans in their dress blues, farmers in their best boots, teachers, students, and business owners, all gathered to celebrate the spirit that had changed their town forever. Jacob stood backstage, adjusting the collar of his shirt, a little uncomfortable under the weight of so much attention. He could see the crowd from between the curtains, people laughing, chatting, waving small American flags. Somewhere in the front row sat his parents, Samuel and Ruth Reed, beaming with pride. Samuel wore his old service jacket, the fabric still sharp at the shoulders despite its years. Ruth had tears shining in her eyes. Beside them, Olivia Barnes waved enthusiastically when Jacob caught her eye. The bond they'd formed in the storm of last year had only grown stronger. Together, along with a growing group of students, they had built something lasting, the Student Justice League, a club dedicated to ensuring no voice went unheard at Silver Creek Academy ever again. Mayor Whitman was nowhere in sight, replaced by an interim mayor who had campaigned on restoring trust and integrity. Chase Whitman, after completing a public apology and a long stint of community service, had quietly transferred to a different school across the state. Some wounds took time to heal, but Silver Creek had decided to move forward stronger and wiser. The ceremony began with the Silver Creek High Marching Band playing a rousing rendition of America the Beautiful. After a few words from the new mayor and the school board, the principal, this time a kind-eyed woman named Ms. Lydia Bennett, stepped up to the microphone. Today, she began, her voice carrying clear across the open square. We celebrate not just a young man, but an idea. That character, courage, and integrity are worth more than wealth, legacy, or influence. The crowd erupted in applause. Jacob's name was called, and for a moment, he felt the ground sway beneath his boots, not from nerves, but from the sheer weight of the journey that had brought him here. He stepped onto the stage, his heart hammering, but his back straight and his chin lifted. As he looked out over the faces of his town, he no longer saw suspicion or pity. He saw respect. He saw hope. Principal Bennett handed him a framed certificate embossed with gold lettering, Silver Creek Medal of Honor, for exemplary courage and integrity. The applause rolled across the square like thunder. Jacob waited for the noise to settle before stepping to the microphone. I don't have a fancy speech, he said, smiling a little. I'm just a farm kid who happened to be in the right, or maybe the wrong place at the right time. A ripple of chuckles went through the crowd. But if there's one thing I've learned this past year, he continued, his voice growing stronger, it's that doing what's right doesn't always mean you'll be rewarded immediately. Sometimes it costs you. Sometimes it feels like standing alone against a storm. He paused, letting the memory of that long, difficult year settle into the quiet. But here's the thing, Jacob said, scanning the crowd. Storms pass, and if you stand firm, if you hold fast to what's right, you'll find you're not as alone as you thought. He glanced towards Samuel and Ruth, then to Olivia and the students who had risked so much to stand with him. You'll find a community, Jacob said. You'll find hope. There was a long moment of silence, the kind that wasn't empty but full of shared understanding, full of emotion. Thank you, Jacob finished simply. Thank you for believing that character still matters. The crowd surged to its feet in a standing ovation, the applause swelling until it seemed to fill the very sky. After the ceremony, Jacob made his way through the crowd, shaking hands, accepting hugs, and exchanging quiet words with old neighbors and new friends alike. He found himself pulled into photos, handed homemade pies, and clapped on the back so many times he was sure he'd be sore tomorrow. But none of it compared to what awaited him when he finally got back home. The Reed farm had been struggling just a year ago, fields fallow, equipment outdated, hope running thin. But the events at Silver Creek Academy had awakened something in the community. Donations had poured in from neighbors, local businesses, even anonymous donors inspired by Jacob's stand. A local bank had sponsored a modernization loan with favorable terms. Volunteers had come out to rebuild fences, repair barns, and plant new crops. Now, the fields stretched rich and green as far as the eye could see, the corn standing tall, the wheat golden and waving in the breeze. A new red-painted barn gleamed in the sun, and the farm buzzed with a quiet, contented energy. Samuel stood on the front porch, arms crossed, watching Jacob approach. "You clean up pretty good, son," he said, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Jacob laughed. "Only for special occasions." They stood together for a moment, looking out over the land that had been in their family for generations. "You know," Samuel said, his voice low and thoughtful, "it's not the crops or the buildings that make a farm. It's the people willing to fight for it, willing to believe it's worth saving." Jacob nodded, feeling the truth of those words settle deep in his bones. He walked out into the middle of the field, the soil rich and warm beneath his boots. He tipped his head back, gazing up at the vast Nebraska sky, endless and blue. And then he closed his eyes, lifted his chin, and whispered to the wind, words that carried farther than he could ever know. "As long as you stand for what's right, no storm can break you." The late afternoon sun bathed the fields in gold, and beyond them, the town of Silver Creek shimmered in the heat, alive, vibrant, reborn. It wasn't just a town anymore. It was a symbol, a living testament to the power of courage, integrity, and the simple, unshakable belief that right is right, no matter how hard the world tries to tell you otherwise. The fields of Silver Creek swayed gently under the summer sun, a song without words, a promise without end. And Jacob Reed, the farmer's son, who had once stood alone, now stood at the heart of it all, not because he had chased power or recognition, but because he had chosen again and again to do what was right. And in doing so, he had planted something stronger than any crop. He had planted hope, forever rooted in the fields of dreams. As the golden fields of Silver Creek stretch endlessly toward the horizon, and the last echoes of Jacob Reed's quiet courage settle into the heart of everyone who's witnessed his journey, we're reminded of something deeper, something that goes far beyond one boy, one school, or even one town. It's about standing for what's right. It's about planting seeds of hope when the soil looks barren. It's about believing, against every storm, every setback, every stacked deck, that kindness, courage, and decency still matter. And if Jacob's story stirred something inside you, if it made you look around and wonder what small acts of bravery you're capable of in your own life, then this is just the beginning. Because here on Farmer Life Stories, we're not just telling tales for entertainment. We're shining a light on the spirit that built America, the grit, the heart, and the stubborn goodness that refuses to back down even when no one's watching. We believe that every story, no matter how small, has the power to move mountains if it's told honestly and bravely. If you felt something today, if Jacob's stand against injustice made you clench your fists, or his quiet resilience made you believe again, then we invite you to be part of something bigger. Drop a comment below. Tell us what part of Jacob's journey resonated with you most. Was it the moment he stood up to Chase in that cafeteria? The day the helicopters landed and Silver Creek realized change had come? Or the simple, powerful promise he whispered to the wind, that no storm could break a soul anchored in what's right? Your voice matters here. Your story matters. We want to hear it. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, not because it's just another channel to follow, but because this is a place where hope still has a home, where the forgotten fields and small towns are more than just backdrops. They're the beating heart of everything good we're trying to protect. Every week, we'll bring you more stories like Jacob's, stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, standing tall when it would have been easier to stay silent, choosing courage over comfort, heart over apathy. Some tales will make you tear up. Some will make you grit your teeth in anger. Some will lift you higher than you thought a simple story ever could. But all of them, every single one, will remind you that in a world often too quick to forget the quiet heroes, there are still places where the soil is rich, the winds are honest, and the fight for what's right never dies. So stick around. There are more fields to cross, more storms to face, more dreams to plant, and who knows? The next story might just be yours. Comment, subscribe, stay rooted in hope. We're just getting started. Welcome to Farmer Life Stories, where every seed of courage blooms into something extraordinary. See you in the next chapter.